Hey everyone, this is the first video of what is hopefully going to be a series called Bits of Ecmascript Specification. So the idea is that we look at something interesting in the language which we face every day and then try to look at the same thing from the perspective of the official specification. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is what is the value of this inside a method call. Okay, how is it different if we are to call a function instead, and what happens if you pass the same method as a callback function? Does that change the value of this within the call? Let's talk about the common problem we face from time to time. So here is the object foo, which has a method bar within it, and the method tries to access some other value within the object foo using this dot some value. Okay, so this is supposed to refer to foo here. And now if we try to call this method using foo.bar, this seems to work as expected, right? Bar gets foo as this in here and all the values are correct. But what about the other option? What if you try to use the same method as a callback function? So in this case, let's say we are taking out foo.bar as a function and passing it to some kind of a on-click handler called setOnClick. Okay, and this setOnClick looks something like this. So it takes a callback as input and at some point later in time calls that callback. So what happens when we run this code, right? So when this callback gets called, the value of this within bar is not equal to foo. The value this in this case is going to be something else, which means this dot some value will not be available, or it might be some kind of a wrong value. So this is a problem, right? If you call something as a method, it seems to work, but if you pass that same method around as a function, the value of this seems to get changed. So let's try to understand what a function call or a method call translates to internally, so that we have a better idea of why this value is changing. For a method call which looks something like this, foo.bar, and then you call it, what it internally translates to, and for the purpose of this understanding, we are going to use this method called function.call. So every function has a method called .call, and you can call it with any custom this value. So we'll use a custom this value to estimate what the language is doing internally. Okay, so in this case, because it looks like the left hand consists of an object foo and then some function or method within that called bar, so the language decides that okay, we're going to call this function foo.bar, but this value is going to be whatever was in the object part of that structure. So because it looks like foo.bar, hence foo gets passed as this value in here. Okay, so this is why things seem to work as expected. The value of this within bar is equal to foo, which is what it normally expects it to be, right? So this is why calling foo.bar directly works. But then what about a function call? So similarly, if it looks like just a function call where there is no object on the left and a function on the right, then it translates to fn.call, but this value is undefined. Okay, so this that is going to go within this function is going to be undefined, which means trying to access this dot some value, it will give you some kind of an error, right? Although this has a little bit of a gotcha. So this is a behavior in strict mode. What I mean by strict mode is that the language JavaScript has always like two modes, strict and non-strict. By default, I think it's in non-strict mode, but you can put any part of the code in a strict mode. So normally in a strict mode, this is the value undefined that you're going to get within the function. But in a non-strict mode, the same undefined gets internally changed to the global object. So in case of a non-strict mode, the value of this within bar is going to be the global object, which is again wrong, right? So you expect this to be foo, not undefined or the global object. So this is what happens in case of a function. That's why if you pass a method around as a callback function, the value of this within it is not as expected. Let's try to understand the same problem from a different perspective. Why did we expect it to work, and why it's okay for it to not work, just from a different way of thinking. So in JavaScript, we expect everything to work by reference. What that means is that it normally doesn't matter if you call something or use some property like foo.bar directly, or if you store it in some variable and pass it along to some function, right? So any value, you can store it in one variable, you can again pass it along to some function which can again store it in some variable, and all of that works as expected in JavaScript. We expect that things should be passable by reference and they would work just as expected. But that is not the case here. What I mean is that if bar is a function within this object foo, bar doesn't remember that it is attached to this object called foo. So foo is an object which knows that bar is its property, but bar doesn't have any knowledge of the original object it is attached to. And in fact, it is just as easy to run the same function or same behavior of bar on a different set of data. So you can take foo.bar and call it on another object foo2, which let's say looks just like foo, right? And then your bar will work with a similar behavior but just on a different set of data. So the idea is that your methods or your functions or your behaviors are not really attached to any particular data by default, and it's very easy to run the same behavior on a different set of data.